Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Karen Tongson, and I am the Barbara Streisand Professor of Contemporary Gender Studies here at USC. And I'm delighted that you're joining us today for a conversation about Sarah Mesle's new book, a banging new book called Reasons and Feelings, Writing for the Humanities Now from the University of Chicago Press. Sarah is professor of teaching, uh, um, Sarah is professor of writing, parentheses, teaching at USC. She's also editor at large at the Los Angeles Review of Books and the editor of the LARB channel Avidly, as well as the NYU short book series Avidly Reads. Joining us today is Emily Ogden, professor of English at the University of Virginia, and Tina Post, associate professor of English at the University of Chicago. Today's conversation was organized in partnership with the USC Writing Program and the Department of English, as well as, of course, the Levan Humanities Institute and the Consortium for Gender, Sexuality, Race, and Public Culture. So before we dive in, our program today is quite simple. We're going to start with a short introduction to the book by our illustrious author, Sarah. And then she's going to be in conversation with Emily and Tina for roughly about 30 to 35 minutes. And at that time, we will then open the floor to questions from everyone. So you're going to be able to ask your questions through the chat, or kind of like Phil Donahue, if anybody remembers who that guy is, you can request a live call-in. We will provide more instructions about the Q&A in the chat shortly, so please pay attention to that. So Sarah, once again, congratulations on your wonderful book. Please tell us a little more about Reasons and Feelings.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. I want to keep this really short. I feel like this book, the key things to know about it are that it is a combination how to write guide, but that is also a why to write guide, and that it proposes that why we write is inseparable from how we write. And it comes out of a couple of questions I have, and partly just an urge, which is to make the thinking about how words got on the page as intellectually interesting and significant as what the words themselves say. So to really kind of present the craft practice of writing as an intellectually engaging question that merits our best resources and thinking. After writing the book, I feel like I've learned a couple of things to think about it. One is that I knew when I wrote it that putting the word now in the title would be really tricky because the now is a very slippery topic. And I mean, I say in the book that as I was finishing the proofs was right after the Chicago fires. It was like ash, a brown sky while I was doing this. And I thought that was a real disaster, but that was January 5th of 2024. And by February 5th of 2024, we had a whole new scale of disasters, let alone where we are now, February 27th in 2026. I did not really know the phrase ICE a year ago, for instance, or I did, but not in the way that I do when I do neighborhood patrol yesterday in my neighborhood. So when I say that I'm trying to make writing interesting, I feel that that speaks to this political context where we need to think about everything we have and ask ourselves, how can it be a resource? How can it help us sustain ourselves, both as individuals, as communities, as humanists? And so how could we make our feelings about writing a resource? How could we make our bad feelings about writing a resource? How could we make the way that we talk to each other about our writing a resource? And those are questions I'm still answering, but they're ones I'm curious other people have thoughts on. And that's the last thing that I will say is that I have 3 things that I hope people take away from this book. One is that I hope the book gives some guidance towards finding ideally pleasurable, but at least meaningful, the time that we spend writing. Like that's what I'm trying to give us some license to consider and to make for ourselves. So more pleasurable, meaningful writing. But another thing that I want people to take from this book is a more pleasurable relationship to not writing and to feeling just more chill about writing less. I feel like low-key it's kind of a not writing guide. And that's something I think is really important for nerds to consider. And then the final thing that is a little more spiritual is that a lot of this book came out of huge changes in my life, professionally and personally. And a moment that was pretty dark, when like a previous moment of crisis in 2008, or 2009 for me, when all of my job interviews went away and I really had to imagine my life in a new way. And with friends, I did. And the infrastructures that helped me to do that aren't totally available to us, and they're not our resources right now. We don't have a sense that social media can be benevolent, I don't think, which we did for a moment in 2012, or I did for a moment in 2012. But the book comes out of a reminder that it's possible to make things feel differently. And it's not easy, but it's possible. And so, when kind of to bring it back around, I guess my question is like, what are our resources now? How can we use what we have to signal, to help be a part of something that feels good and sustaining at a now that is ever changing, but still full of connection. So that's all very abstract. I also talk in the book a lot about my kids and my dog, and like, I don't really talk about gel pens, but I like those a lot, and I like mechanical pencils. So I'm really hoping this conversation with you folks can include questions about like, what works for you? Do you like writing near your pet? Do you not like writing near your pet? What pens do you use? What are the origins of your projects? So those are some things I would say at the beginning.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Also, I just wanted to show everyone this beautiful book, The Material Object.
It's really pretty.
But this is the portion that will return to the conversation with our guests. I'm wondering which of you wants to start first, Emily or Tina, with maybe a comment or a question.
I can start, Tina, if that works for you. Um, I wanted, in honor of Sarah, to pull a quote because one of Sarah's great writing tips is that when you're writing, there should be a quote that your editor can pull that is concrete, easy to grab onto, pithy, beautiful, and this is advice that Sarah very much follows. So one could have picked so many pull quotes, but I picked one from the end of the book, which I'm going to read now. And it's about our predicament. It's about this thing that I think is really unique about Sarah's book, in my experience, which is that it's a writing guide that is also in dialogue with critical university studies. That's giving us a history of what is happening now in the university. Why are we publishing the way we're publishing? And Sarah, as a scholar, as a writer, as an editor, is so uniquely positioned to do this beautifully. So she's talking about this predicament, and here's the pulled quote. We're setting ourselves the task of finding a livable, sustainable way to practice an impractical vocation. It's not surprising that we feel weird. And I just love this. The humor and the courage and the honesty of this moment seems to me really a beautiful introduction to the book, because this is what Sarah's voice is like, plus dogs, plus kids, plus hard-hitting critique, and also incredible writing tips. And so I think it's a combination I've really never seen elsewhere. We're so lucky to have it, and I celebrate its presence in the world. Did you hope that we would start with a question as well, or did you want us to each give an introductory comment? Because I can go to a question, or we could go to Tina.
It's really up to you about giving the introductory comments for a question. Well, actually, you know what, Tina? Why don't you give an introductory comment, and then we can dive into the question so that we have these two framings to pursue, or multiple framings to pursue.
Thank you. Well, first, thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. So I think for me, one of the most important contributions the book makes is that it urges academic writers to think somewhat differently about their public-facing writing. And I remember receiving the questionable advice, allegedly cribbed from the world of journalism, that public-facing writing should be pitched at something like an 8th grade reading level. And implicit in this advice is, of course, the idea that the reader of public-facing work is not you, and perhaps fair enough. But more damningly, this advice also implies that the public reader is beneath you. And part of what I most appreciate about Reasons and Feelings is that Sarah grants us, in writing for the public, the ability to decide the ways that our writer may, in fact, be quite a bit like us. This is not, of course, to suggest that she advocates a narrowness of interest or publication value, or venue, rather, or a disregard for positionality. In fact, the book is shot through with meditations on positionality, though of course she does urge us to think about venues and the kinds of conversations happening in them, both in their contents and in their tone. But this book advocates for us to assume when imagining the readers of our public, or as it happens, our counterpublic, that they are very much our people and that they are in the midst of life, that we sometimes want to encounter rich ideas, new voices, ongoing conversations in the scraps of time that we gather up as we wait for the bus or for a kid's baseball game to warm up or for the pasta water to boil. And our readers aren't always at a quiet desk or armchair with a cup of tea fortified by stacks of great books, and some of these other lifings aren't so conducive to intricate sentences or sustained argumentative maneuvers. There's nothing wrong with this, the book insists. Our readers are not dumber for waiting for the bus or for the baseball game. They're just consuming differently, and we can meet them there. Moreover, if our readers aren't always at a desk with a cup of tea fortified by stacks of great books, writers aren't always either. And Reasons and Feelings urges you not only to meet your reader where she is, but to meet yourself as a writer there too. One of my favorite chapters of the How section is You Write with the Body Which Keeps the Score. And truly not enough writing guides remember that writing is not just the work of the brain, but the back and the eyes and the fingers and the heart, and depending how you store your things, lots of other parts. So in short, it's a writing guide that allows your entire life into the process, which is really lovely. I'll stop there.
And, with these opening comments, I invite, questions or points of entry if there's something you want to respond to, Sarah, that each of these wonderful respondents has mentioned.
I'm open to questions, but I mean, I really am just interested in Emily or everybody's process. Emily knows this. I'm always like, what music do you write to? Karen, I warned you that I was going to ask you what music you write to, but I would love to hear from you all where you are when you write. I talk in some detail about where I have become I write at the same chair and the same desk or at my kitchen table every day, which is my only table. Emily, do you have a place where you write?
I do. When I was reading the part of your book about how a dog needs to be breathing nearby for you to write, that is true for me too. And I have a young puppy, so it's always a good thing if a dog is not chewing the wooden furniture nearby and is instead just quietly sleeping. But that has been a big part of my process for a long time. I have special pencils. They're not far away right now, just in case. It's a little treat. I call them with my students. I call them Scooby snacks. Like I think you need little treats and little sort of Pavlovian things around.
Do you chew on it?
Yeah. Do I chew on it? I try not to, but it does happen sometimes. Yeah. Yeah, it does.
I have really come around to mechanical pencils that are very important to my writing, but you can't chew on them. And I really like to chew on a pencil, I have to say.
Yeah, you need a rawhide.
I do need a rawhide. Tina, where do you write?
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a rover. In part, I moved like a year ago, and I feel like I'm still sort of figuring it out. But not often in my office, actually, where I find it hard. I'm sort of like historically, I have a bit of I like to write in bed, a little bit Proustian or something. Although I am team cat, and cats are not such helpful writing companions because they want to be right on the keyboard. But I do, if I'm handwriting, I have a special fountain pen that I use. And I also have mechanical pencils, but they're for underlining, which I do with a ruler because whatever. But I will say I love this question because when I did an MFA in creative writing a while ago, and at the time we were always so eye rolly about like the public question section where people would be like, "Do you drink tea when you write?" And we would be like, but also, I think your book shows why it actually really does matter, and finding out those things from other people and like getting the sort of strategies of why actually the mint tea is part of the ritual that is the thing that lets you do the thing is really important sometimes. Yeah. Where do you write?
I'm very routinized. When I'm really working on a project, I will, there is this thing that my friends chide me about called the Tongson method, which is I get up, get into my office, not this one, but the one at home, and I mess around for a little bit, on socials or do whatever I want for a few hours. And then at 10 or 11, I get started. And then I write for a couple of hours, take a break, write for another couple of hours, then go to the gym. And that's sort of the, when things are humming, that's when I do it. And I'll sometimes do those hourly blocks of writing with other people where I just text with them and we do these little units. They're not Pomodoros technically, but whatever. But recently, actually, I wanted to talk about how Amy Bender, my dear colleague here in the English department, was, sort of talking about this new work that she's been doing related to writing fairy tales. And as she talked about and her process, which involves, kind of stealing different moments and roving in these different scenes, and then also just not just about the scene of writing, but allowing yourself to move on from a piece of writing if it's not working, and just, writing in little bits and pieces. And since that presentation, which was a few weeks ago, I've started doing that. And I feel like I'm in a completely different space with writing. And I even, speaking about writing in bed, Tina, at some point I was just like I noticed that I was punching a bunch of notes into my phone. And then I just said, you know what, I'm going to grab my laptop. And then I wrote a whole piece about like this restaurant in Echo Park that's closing called Tex, and that'll be coming out soon. So, but so it is just one of those situations where I think at this juncture in my life, and also at this juncture in my professional career, I allow myself to move beyond the sort of regimented discipline of the quote unquote Tongson method, um, and to, you know, uh, be a little freer, to tap into the romanticism of my high school writerly self a little bit more. Like everything around me could be an idea. And I think that that's part of what the book also does, though, is that it shows how in these kind of moments of constraint, there are little flourishes of inspiration or everyday, kind of, I don't know, like magic is overused as a concept, but these moments of, yeah, like, activation.
I will note that in the chat, everybody, there are many people popping up where they write, and I am very jealous of my colleague Corey Elizabeth Nelson, who has a bespoke writing nook. I just want to throw that out there as a handcrafted for her. That is that really takes me back to these happy, not these happy golden years, but the Little House book where Laura gets married and Almanzo builds her a bespoke pantry, and it's yeah. Anyway, so I just feel like making your little space around you. But I mean, I guess Tina, to your point about like why does it matter? I think that's a good question, and all this stuff can get kind of artisanal and cult of personality, which that's the bad version. But there's two reasons why I do think it's important is that as a writing professor, but also as an editor, I've just encountered so many people's writing fears, and my own also, which are considerable. And I've just talked to so many astonishing writers who feel so bad about themselves that they don't live up to this fantasy of it should work, that I just sit down and then it comes out. And if it's not working that way, it's a personality flaw. I really try and hammer this home. It's like that, like, what can we do to get, that is not a resource that is helping us, or at least it's not one that's helping me. So to really move beyond that and really talk about the different strategies, which may or may not have anything to do with the mask, but then, or with the magic of the writing, but kind of they do. But then the other thing too is that I really just, I try and say this in the chapter that you mentioned, the body, we write with our bodies, which is like I have a space and I can control it is such a privilege. And I mean, I think there's so many assumptions about what writing should be like. And so many ways of talking about writing that really normalize, like, well, you should be able to have 45 quiet minutes. And so many moments in even my extremely privileged life where I have not had 45 minutes I could control. So really trying to think about how we can share our methods without normalizing certain kinds of access. I mean, I feel like without, like, I don't know, like that feels like a kind of a flat way of putting it. Yet I do feel it's really important, I kind of talk about this in the chapter Critical Distance too, right? Like all these kind of writing guides that are like, you should, if you love writing, you should just turn to the writing. It's like, well, I would love to. Great. Glad that works for you.
I like
Anyway,
taken by moods to a certain extent, right? But this is where I also want to ask you a question about something you mentioned regarding citationality, like the portions of the book that talk about that, because I think that um, at least in my mind sometimes it's sort of like I get torn or like drawn into the sort of um, meta conversations, as you're saying. I think this is on page 109 where
I just have to mention that one really important article.
yeah, exactly. It's sort of like, oh, the funny movie or death came into being through a particular academic exchange, and like the determination to cite in depth and to do that kind of work. And um, it's as Chicago might say, a hard habit to break when you're trying to write in different ways. And I wonder, if you could share a little bit more about, you know, other the other forms of citationality or homage that can happen without being mired in that kind of compulsive set of gestures that many academics are trained into.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would love to hear. I feel like that's both a craft question and it is a real ethical question. And I would genuinely be interested in what other people think about this, because you may notice I really kind of waffle about it in the book. On the one hand, I'm really like, look, if somebody is waiting for the pasta to boil and they have crabby kids and then like the dog wants to go out, they want to hear your funny story, not the 7 citations that led you to your funny story or your angry point about whatever. um, and I have had this conversation many times with people who are like, here is my very angry piece that I'm going to slow down the emotional experience by telling the whole genealogy. And I was like, like we don't know, like it's not going to create, that's not the time for this. Although I have often, like editorially been like, sure, like, like go ahead and tell us if like how this came to be through your amazing colleague. So I do feel like on the one hand, there's a sense of the citations or the developing of the framework are so can be a way to really pay respect to who you're building on, which we absolutely need to do. They can also be a way to hide yourself and what you have to say, which I don't think that serves us or our readers. I think you need to be able to say what you want to say and stand with it in its necessary imperfections. Or maybe you don't have to write right now, right? Like that's totally fine if you don't have, like just there's so many other things to do. So I think as a practice, one thing to do is to write it all out and then cut it out. Um, I will say I'm also really thinking about this as a teacher. And this semester, I am in my advanced writing for the humanities class. I'm taking real inspiration from Tina Campt, who I think is wonderful in many ways. But the notes to the first chapter of her book, it's Lacan, a couple of other people, and then 6 friends. And I just think that's so great of really saying, here's this conversation, this is this conversation, this is this conversation. So for the paper that I'm asking my students to do right now, their footnotes are to each other in class conversation. So I'm really trying to get them to, and especially in this AI moment where there's like this machine out there that will really synthesize things for you, I want them to build a habit of who am I letting in? I'm not pretending that I'm myself, or that I'm an isolated figure that just thought of this of myself, but here's how it came out of this web. So those are some of my thoughts, but I do think it's both a really interesting craft practice and an ethical practice of how do you pay respect? How do you be in community? How do you not waste time?
It is a tough question. I really loved this idea that you had in your book, which Tina alluded to a few minutes ago, that the reader may not be exhausted, but then again, they may well be. And what does the exhausted reader need from your topic sentences? Probably not a thorny theoretical quote. they need to know what you're saying. So maybe the quote comes, but at least at some point, the reader needs to be able to follow a pretty clearly blazed trail of your thought if they're tired. And it seems to me like, it's easy to imagine the reader as like the master of the seminar who knows everything and already pre-knew everything you could possibly say. And so the point is not to allow yourself to be seen not knowing something. But if you imagine, as you suggest, an exhausted reader, then you kind of begin to see, well, yes, let's cite people where we cite them, but let's also make it clear at some point what I'm saying, and then the reader will not be so tired, And I think that's really important to think about, and it's kind of it's kind of energizing to think about because it becomes less about being not found out and more about being found.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, right? Like, what are our resources for putting down our insecurities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of being found where you are. Yeah.
I want to turn to a couple, Tina, unless you wanted to chime in
No, go
immediately
ahead. Go
about
ahead.
this,
Yeah.
a couple of follow-up questions related to things you introduced, Sarah, that are in the chat. And Tina, this actually, I'm going to shoot this one over to you because Shruti asks, how do those who write in bed not get tired or distracted? Just asking, since that always happens to me when I try to write in bed.
Yeah, this is like I think it's probably deeply constitutional because it really comes down to animality, which is that like I get distracted if I'm uncomfortable. And when I'm sitting at a desk, I'm uncomfortable and I'm feeling sorry for myself and I need to play 37 games of solitaire and I just can't do it. But if I'm in a bed and I'm like comfortable and cozy and like every 30 seconds, as I said, I'm taking the cat back off of the keyboard, but I can sort of spread my papers and my books in an array and I prop myself up, but then like yeah, it's actually, I guess again, I really love that chapter about bodies. Like that part of me can settle, and then I don't have to pay attention to it, and so then I can think a little bit. And I can imagine that does not work for everybody, but that's why it works for me.
The cat is crucial, I think, to bed writing,
For sure.
honestly.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if you've all heard this phrase that everybody's been, it's like, I'm bed rotting today. So it's sort of like the kind of mythos, the contemporary mythos of bed rotting, which I think can be, like a moment where you just allow yourself to indulge in thoughts that drift or do their thing, and having some sort of instrument there, whether it's your laptop or something else, to kind of jot down some of the daydreamy qualities of, or whatever, the kind of wild ideas you get in this state of relaxation can be a fun way. And having a cat around to help, just to speak for them, since there's a dog moment, um, is often important. I also want to mention Mariana's question to the group about the role of writing groups in your lives. And they mentioned that I've had one for years and find it very nurturing. So, how many of you write with groups or partners, writing partners?
I'm curious what people say.
I have sometimes done that. I don't think I'm the biggest group writer. I'm a little bit of a go hide in my corner, and that's when I get to not talk to anyone kind of writer. So I'm kind of on that side of it.
I too have had waves of being part of groups. There were times that they were really important to me. During COVID, they were really important to me. Just we on Zoom, there's a few of us that we've had some morning writing sessions. And I do think until you get into the practice of, or if you need to get back into the practice of, I mean, we all put the calendar hold in, right? It's like, I'm writing from this time to this time. And then like the emergency email comes up or the whatever. But if you need to get back into the habit of just like, no, I'm really writing in this time, then the group can really help recharge that, even if you then need to, once that's reestablished, retreat into the bed rot. But so there are moments when I have group writing, but yeah, it's not. I'm not one of those people who's had the same group for years and years and years. For writing at least.
Sarah.
We had a dissertation group that was incredibly sustaining and is still like a really important imagined community for me. And then I've done a lot of collaborative writing over the years with various beloved friends. And now I have a good friend, Phil Masiak, who we just read all of each other's stuff. And I don't know how I got that lucky that like but we had, no, I guess I do know because we wrote television stuff together for a long time, and that really puts you in a routine. And right now we both are a little out of sync. Phil, I don't know if you're here, but I'm ready to read more. But really just having somebody who is kind of in a penciled in way available at a particular time in the week, and who I absolutely know believes in me and I know how to hear their advice is really key. And the key thing that Phil, first of all, I mean, like we're working kind of on the same projects, or not the same projects, but like we're both trying to find a middle ground for not quite scholarly, but still deeply researched writing. So we're trying to figure out the same thing. But I always write too much and feel about like whatever it is. Like in the writing about feelings chapter, I had to cut literally, I think, 6,000 words that I wrote about the history of cholera, which to me is like deeply connected to this, and like the whole history of sentimentalism and Harriet Beecher Stowe's kid who died of cholera. And like, I was like, nobody can understand what I have to say about how feelings matter to writing without understanding the ideology of cholera and the 3 global pandemics. And Phil was like, yeah, you know what, Sarah, you're right. I think you should write more about cholera. And he was like, and then it was only when he said that I was like, yeah, okay, no, I could just cut that. So it was like, he's really good at like paying attention to my weird divergences in a way that helps me see them for what they are. I will say I'm finally getting to use those 6,000 words in a talk I'm giving in Cincinnati, where Stowe's son got cholera and died of it in a couple of weeks. So that would be one of my points, is like, just save it, right? It doesn't have to be in this. That would another part of the citational ethics is like, you can write it and then save it for something else. But yeah, and then I do write actually with my husband for hours a day. Like we just sit on FaceTime together and write. We're long distance. So that is a really big part of my writing habitus as well. Very romantic. But it's nice because I have a dog, but he doesn't have to have the dog. So like we can have our different relationships to this space, but like the portal between us feels really good.
And I will say that I don't know that I've been in a writing group since my dissertation era, but the person or the people who sometimes I text with, it really is just about sharing time. It is that calendar clearing, Tina. It is about resituating habits. But we do share little snippets of what we're particularly happy with in that hour or whatever, 45 minutes of like, hey, I just wrote this crazy thing about Gilmore Girls. Like, what do you think? Or whatever. And so there's kind of immediate feedback in ways that sometimes writing feels very solitary. It ameliorates that because you're like, hey, I feel pretty good about this thing, or I'm having trouble with this thing. And, then you kind of move on, and it's not particularly deep. But there is, I just wanted to shout out that Corey mentions the Writing Center's Tuesday night write togethers from 5 to 7. And also that Mariana said that the groups write on their own and share the writing afterwards and get feedback. So I think that we've been talking about 2 different kinds of writing group scenarios. A part of what I want to do, I think, in the process of trying to start a writing group, but mostly just to get everybody, like, it's like trying to get everybody to like walk around the park, or Les at the Res, which is a lesbian writing group around the reservoir here in Silver Lake. So it's sort of like that motivation is a kind of social impetus to do this work. I'm looking. So Zach has opened the chat. Obviously, I mean, the chat has been open, but there is a call-in feature for anyone who wants to ask their question directly. I
Long
also
time listener, first time caller.
I also want to go back to your question, Sarah, though, about music.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do people write to music at all, or what is the sort of, yeah, like, what is the vibe of that? I've heard my spouse, Sarah Kessler, says writing to the hours soundtrack really works for her. So,
That's amazing.
yeah. So,
yeah, I talk about this in the book. I used to have a playlist that I started during my dissertation, or I still have it. It's called Slow Steady. And it is all the songs that I learned that were good to write to, and I would just put it on repeat. And it was really nice because like you hear the song and you know it's going to come back if you stay with it. But then I stopped and I only listened to Kate Bush's 2005 double album, Ariel, only. Like, and it, so that's, so that is makes it hard to write with other people because not everyone wants to listen to Kate Bush's 2005 double album Ariel on repeat. It literally, and it has a song where he just sings the numbers of the digits of the number pi. Great, it's great.
Niche. It's a little niche.
It's a little niche, but I generally like things that has like a little bit of propulsion, and I like things that has words as long as it's not something I want to sing along with. Emily, I know, only listens to beats.
I do. I have a playlist that's all like within 5 beats per minute of 120 beats per minute, and it's all. Oh. I know, it's kind of insane. It might not be my most cuckoo writing process, but it's definitely up there. Yeah, so it's all electronic music, and it's all because that tempo, which I bet I wouldn't be surprised if that is correct, like because I listen to it so much that I mean someone has a metronome, but it's it just kind of hypnotizes me, and then I just sort of keep typing at that rate, and it sort of works for me.
I once shared with my writing, Emily, I have to know, I'm in a room with some of my students, and when you said that, there was a collective gasp from all of them.
No.
But I once shared with my students, this was a couple of years ago, my Slow Steady playlist, and I was like, no, I'm really going to share, like, I'm letting you in. But the song, Karen, you'll be interested in this, that I took off of this, and because I was too embarrassed, and I was like, why is this so embarrassing? And it was Tori Amos' A Sort of Fairy Tale, which honestly is one of the songs I have written to the most. And it's a great California writing song. And she's like driving up the 101 and it's a bad breakup and her hair in the car. And but somehow I couldn't admit to my students that I was like a Tori Amos lady. Yeah.
Yeah, that
came back just for that. I love it.
A Sort of Fairy Tale is the song Sarah just mentioned.
Yeah, that I shared a playlist with my students, and I couldn't admit to them, though they now know because some of them are here that I do, in fact. Yeah,
Tina.
I like songs with words, but it can't be anything too interesting. It can't be anything I'm listening to for the first time, because then I'll actually listen to it instead of background. So I find actually The National is like it's like just a crooning deep voice in the background somewhere. I don't actually have to listen to any of the lyrics. It can play. Sometimes I mix it up a little like Eric Satie or something, but mostly it's The National.
Oh, that's really good. I really wrote my dissertation exams to an early National EP. I have a question also for all of you, or not if people in the audience do, but this morning I was having a good time looking over the introductions to a couple of our books, and I was really thinking about the difference between this book of mine and Karen's, the introduction to norm porn, and also the conclusion of norm porn, which is so much about when you cry and when you don't cry, which is a lot of what my book is also in some ways about, but how interestingly different those are as a set of problems to Tina, your book about being deadpan, or about deadpan. And I don't know what to say about that, but I just kind of was like, oh, that's really an interesting collection of I was going to say a collection of energies because I'm a middle-aged lady who lives in LA. But also it gets, I think, to some of like the content of the book. I chose to share with people who registered the chapter that's about writing about feelings, which is a chapter that I really loved writing and wrote 45 versions of, including the version that had 6,000 words about the history of cholera. So I don't know, I'm curious about how people feel about the feelings in their book, or the feelings as a topic of our books, and also where we're at now intellectually with the question of how not to get really solipsistic in our feelings, but also to make them useful.
Yeah.
I love that chapter. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, sorry, Tina. Yeah, I love that question. And I was thinking a lot in your book about sort of the negotiation of the personal, where on the one hand, there's sort of the potential pitfall of like a trade publisher might want your feelings in a kind of vampiric, let's make you a brand kind of way. And on the other hand, an academic publisher, although this hasn't been my actual experience of academic publishers, but a fictional academic publisher might not want your feelings in an objectivity kind of way. And where is the in between, where it's like a rigor of feelings? And so I really like the way that your history in the beginning of the book, and in that feeling chapter in particular, your history of what is the university and how do we write in and outside of it, was really centered on that question, because I think it's a great question, and actually a central question for what the university is. On Not Knowing, my last book, there was a moment where like I kind of half seriously was only putting in things that made me cry, like it had to make me cry to be quoted, and I felt a little weird about that, but I did feel like that was a more helpful dowsing rod than anything else. So there might be more of a sort of central feeling in that book than it might appear.
Tina.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that the secret impetus behind Deadpan is that I have none. I like the most transparent face ever, and my life would be so much easier if I could actually perform the thing that I'm so obsessed with because I can't. Um, but I loved that chapter, and it felt deeply right to me. Partly, like it's intriguing for me now anyway, because I'm like my next book is I'm working on coziness, and that's such a like there's a lot of feeling there, and it's yeah, whatever. But one of the things I loved so much about the chapter, and Emily just put me in mind of it again, is how you very usefully frame like objectivity and reasonableness as its own sort of emotive posture. that it's not an emotion to be reasonable or like to perform reasonableness. It is as much as any other one that we might perform instead. So or choose not to perform reasonableness. That's a legitimate choice. Or one can be reasonable and other things at the same time. And so yeah, I don't know if that answers it.
It was interesting. I had really great reader reports for this, and I really want to shout out reader number 2, the mythical boogeyman, who was so helpful for me. But it really helped me revise the publics and counterpublics, as it were, chapter, which started off with a completely different frame narrative that was much more about like how one day people were mean to me on the internet, which definitely was a big day in my life, but really was very helpful. Like, this is not like we know, like actually the kind of juxtaposed that narrative about it was pretty well written, because I really had feelings about having bad internet experiences, but with the history from objectivity that's in the feelings chapter, I was like, this reading is actually the place where you're getting at a shareable heart for nerds, like the being like, and then look at this and look at this, and that actually has this collectivizing potential much more so than kind of a drawn out personal narrative. And that was really helpful to me as a framework that I think kind of infused the book as I revised it, in terms of like one thing that we might connect about is our like, how close is the dog? How close is the cat? I also really like cats. I just have a dog that would eat them. But also like a thing that we have in common is like being nerds together who are like, and then in chapter 3 they say this, and it was like, whoa, right? And not everybody, but like your people can like have that like emotional lift about story to like the intellectual process together. And that was really helpful to me as thinking about not only is reasonableness a posture, but close reading, I would say it's like close writing or close narrating is also embodied experience for those of us who are nerds in a particular kind of way, which I would say is the best way to be a person.
Well, and that's the avidly of it, right? That's sort of where, that the avidly project started there, to the point where, you gave Adrian De Leon and I whatever space for 15,000 words of absolute nerdistry over the World Series
Yeah.
that probably people can't read their way through. But whatever it is, it creates space for what is often an obsession compulsion that drives the kind of thinking or writing that scholarly work or what have you demands. But I guess it's just there are different ways that scholars are challenged to quote unquote make that interesting, or to at least make the madness worth looking at for a period of time, or to like the avidness worth um, something that might be contagious, right? To have it be something that might be contagious.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I was on a writing panel somewhat recently where somebody gave the advice to some undergraduates of like, well, don't write about what you love because it'll ruin it. And I just think that's like so, I mean, it was clearly a coming from a real place of experience, but it's so opposite to my experience, which is like, right, yeah, which is like, how could writing about what you love spoil it? Like even if part of what you write is about it, how it's imperfect or damaging to you, or right, like there's nothing that we love that's going to be a pure object. So I haven't found it yet. Tori Amos included is not a pure object, but I love it, right? So it's like understanding my relation to that and my embarrassment of it is how I get to the thing that I at least want to read about.
I think
There are
also
a few
this is
comments
maybe,
in the
oh
chat.
no,
Oh, go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Tina. Go ahead, Tina.
No, I was just gonna because I think I didn't have a fully formed thought around the citational stuff quite yet at the moment that we were talking about it, but maybe that's actually what I want to say about the best kind of citational practice is that sure there are moments where you have to do your sort of like historiographic due diligence or something, but often it's actually just the excitement of like your people on the idea that you want to convey, like who your bench of people, what they can contribute.
Is it okay if I turn to just a few remarks in the chat just to bring some folks in? Uh, uh, a little bit more commentary on listening to music while writing. Lisa Vest, of course, who is writes about music, says writing about music makes it tricky to listen to what I'm writing. 'Cause, I can't listen to what I'm writing about at all. So that is, I think that one of the things that I wanted to add is that as someone who also writes about music a lot, it can be very difficult. And but this is where I do want to shout out the great Joshua Clover for the format of critical karaoke that he created, which honestly is a kind of jumpstart format for me, where you just have the length of a song to write about, ostensibly the song, but often you end up writing about something else. And I've seen so many young scholars who have ambitions to write otherwise, using that format and doing really well with opening up all these different worlds in the constraint of that. So that's one thing. But yeah, I especially with the Carpenter's book that ruined my algorithm on somebody listening.
Right.
Was ruined. I wouldn't say ruined. That's cruel because I do enjoy the Carpenter's music, but I had to listen to everything to be able to write about that. And so, anyway, I think that that's just sort of something to draw in. When can you not listen to music while you're writing? Also, some admiration for from Benjamin for the part of Reasons and Feelings about the respective demands of academic and popular publishing as they shift under crisis, and that being a most powerful part of the analytic of the book. And yeah, I don't know if any of you want to respond to any of these other remarks that have just come through.
I will say just on the writing thing, and I have a collection of essays about white women's hair coming out August 25th, now available for pre-order. Has a very pretty pink cover, much like Reasons and Feelings. But there's a chapter in it about Britney Spears and her shaving her head. And that was a nightmarish chapter for various reasons, but one of them, I mean, literally nightmarish. But like that is fantastic pop music that I could not listen to while I was writing it. But also, what was the soundtrack to explaining the symbiotic disaster story that was Britney Spears? Like that was a really hard one to find a soundtrack for. I could not write to Kate Bush about Britney Spears, so it was like a real. But it was also, I think I ended up listening to a lot of Shakira. So it was like same period. But yeah, I mean, Ben, thanks for saying that. Yeah, I really feel that an important part of how we think about what our writing might do is really something that I was never trained to think about, which is just like the care work and the infrastructures and the practical mechanics and who's going to send the emails and how is it going to be distributed about how our writing moves. And that's a big part of what that chapter is about in the book, the fantasy of like, oh, we'll just write for the public, like academia is in crisis, so we're going to turn to this other thriving field, media, right? Like that's such a, like, I don't think you can do that ethically unless you are willing to like learn how to use CMS, right? Or like really try and do that's an overstatement, but I do really think the ethics of care and labor around sharing our works is so important. At MLA, I was on a panel about some of these issues, and one of the other panelists was Jenny Tan, who's an acquisitions editor at Penn. And one of the things that she was talking about that I hadn't heard somebody phrase this way, but I really felt like I was like, oh, this is very important and we should all know about this, is that as academic libraries have cut their budgets, for instance, USC Library does not own my book. To send you all a PDF of it, I had to get a colleague at another university to download a copy. They don't have my book, right? I think 2023 was the last year they bought books, Tina's, and so maybe someday they'll buy books again. But because libraries are not buying books, academic presses cannot sell to libraries. So they need to publish books that can be sold for $28 to somebody who wants to read it. So academic books need to be able to be something that people want, right? Individually, not just as a library. So the myth that academic publishing is going to force you to be so austere and timeless is not only, I'm not sure it was ever true, but it's especially not true infrastructurally right now because the funding structures of how books are moving is so different. And I'm sure that's different for different presses, but there's somebody who's doing that work and sending those emails. And so we really need to think about what their lives are like too, and what their bodies are like, and what they're nervous about or afraid of. You edit with your body, that keeps the score also, right? I think it's definitely something.
We have about 5 minutes left, and no one has used the call-in feature yet, which is a bummer, but maybe a brave soul will want to try that in the last few minutes. We have now 4 minutes. But I wanted to invite the panelists to get their final remarks or questions in as we wait for any additional questions from the gallery.
I do have one that I'm kind of burning to ask, which is when you were talking at the beginning, Sarah, about the moment that social media felt like a resource, and you were asking, what are our resources now? And I was to make this a smaller question, because it's a massive question, I was put in mind of the part of your book where you say that WordPress had this outsized role in the possibility of little online magazines getting going in, I think, about the 2010s. And I'm just wondering, what do you think? I love like a rainbow has just appeared across the screen as we talk about like the resources for the future. What do you think? What is like the WordPress of this moment? I would be so curious to hear what you would say. Like, what is the little technology or event or material thing that has that type of potential in your view?
Yeah, I have a quick answer, which is that a year ago I would have said Substack, and now an imaginary we that maybe we're all in, I would say, is like trying to figure out if it's Patreon, which has newsletter software. And the reason that I think that's interesting, and that is a little bit of a blow for me, because it's hard to have an editorial function and it's hard to give credit to many people's bylines on newsletters. That was always an issue with Avidly, but it's like we can give lots of people bylines, but not if you co-write something. It's like really tricky. Like, will the editing software allow you to attribute to like actually give credit to different writers? But the thing about these newsletter softwares is that you can kind of self-distribute, and you can go directly to people's emails, and you don't have to rely on social media distribution functions, which I think we're all really confused about. So I feel like that's the question right now, but that is not a complete answer. And I would also say, if you don't hate it, turn your ads on. If you like a publication, you should think about how you are funding its resources. And if it's not looking at their ads, you have to give them money for somewhere, like really value the work. So we have to be willing to pay for what we consume.
I have a question. I know that this is a very last minute question. How do you feel about what academics should charge as their freelance rates if they freelance? Should they allow publications who have a tight freelance budget to give, essentially, if certain academics are subsidized in certain positions or positionalities, should they consider that? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, on Avidly many years ago, we ran a whole series about writing or not for free. That is an issue that no one has solved in 150 years. So I don't have a good answer for you right now. I do think the Avidly essays about that were really good. I feel like nothing's for free, and there are lots of ways to get paid, and money is a really important way to do it. But yeah, I think
formula.
But I do think the question of like what we want to be paid is directly correlated to what we're willing to pay and to who. So if you're not giving a lot of money to writers, I'm not very interested in requests about how you need to be paid for your own writing and money. That would be one way of thinking about the ethics of it.
And then Zach Breckenridge at the very end also, we're not going to have time to answer this question, but in part because we are recording this in a way that will become, I guess, a podcast, or like archived on audio at least, and maybe distributed about the form of the audio format in academia, essentially, because people are losing the bandwidth to read, but they love listening to stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have my fancy microphone that did not work today, but here it is. But this is a perfect way to end, which is just a plug, which is in the chat, that the Humanities Center is going to host. I sent the emails. So we're going to have 3 more events about writing, and the link is right there. It's on writing sentences, on writing with evidence, and on writing endings. And I'm super stoked to nerd out about everybody's pets, pencils, pens. And I hope you all can come and send your students.
And that brings us to time. Thank you all, speaking of listening, for listening and being present here today. I want to also thank, of course, our respondents, Emily and Tina, for joining this conversation. And above all, thank you to the wonderful and brilliant Sarah for this book. And please buy this book and get the new one, or pre-order the new one, about to come out this August, on white women's hair. Thank you so much, everyone.